Right around the late 1990s, a SoHo restaurant expanded their wine cellar in their basement. Male employees were constantly going down to retrieve wine bottles or glasses, but none of the employees liked going down there. They felt like there was something incredibly eerie about being down in the basement. In fact, they often heard noises down there, and on more than one occasion got to the basement to discover broken bottles, almost like they had violently been thrown against the wall. The restaurant continued to excavate and eventually found an old piece of history behind their walls that had been lost for 200 years. And what they discovered has been investigated by a number of paranormal experts, and it is considered one of the most haunted places in New York City. And today, you can swipe a credit card 10 feet away from it. So what is it? Where is it? Well, let's get into today's story. On December 22nd, 1799, the city of New York was in mourning. It had been less than a week that their former president, George Washington, had passed away. His death dominated newspaper headlines and was all anybody was talking about. But that being said, life has to find a way to move on, and someone who was doing just that was a young woman named Guliema Sands. Everyone called her Elma. The 22-year-old Elma was staying at a boarding house owned by her cousin Catherine and Catherine's husband. The boarding house was located at 208 Greenwich Street, which would be right across the street from the World Trade Center today. Someone else who lived in the boarding house was an established carpenter named Levi Weeks. Levi flirted with some of the ladies there, and none more than Elma. They met in July. The family became suspicious, but nobody knew for certain that a relationship of any sorts had formed between the two, but one definitely had. In September, Catherine developed a fever and isolated herself for about 6 weeks, leaving the boarding house in the hands of her husband and Elma. And it was during this time that Elma and Levi began to supposedly stay in each other's living quarters in secret. Elma was having the time of her life. She was so happy, she was falling in love, she felt like she needed to tell somebody about this, but she didn't want that to be Catherine. So instead, she told another boarder named Hope, who just happened to be Catherine's sister. She made Hope swear that she wouldn't tell anybody about this, particularly Catherine, because she and Levi had already discussed getting married. And because Levi wanted to keep this marriage a secret, nobody was going to get invited to attend the ceremony. However, the night before they were scheduled to elope, so December 21st, Hope spilled the beans to Catherine. Elma was approached about the elopement hours before it was to take place, and Catherine tried to invite herself, but Elma insisted that Levi would have a problem with this, and so she should stay home. But Elma was actually pretty relieved that this wasn't a secret anymore. So her cousin helped her to get ready, and around 8 p.m., Elma left the boarding house wearing her best coat, a hat, a shawl, and she borrowed a fur muff from a neighbor. A muff is one of those hand-warming accessories that can be used instead of gloves. However, Elma and Levi were not seen leaving together. All Catherine remembered was hearing the boarding house door close. A few hours later, Levi walked into the boarding house, but Elma wasn't with him. There was a conviction in his voice. He seemed concerned. He wanted to know where Elma was, almost expecting her to still be at the boarding house, but she wasn't. Catherine, Hope, everybody started to panic. Where was she? And who did she leave the boarding house with? Catherine was convinced it had been Levi, but what if it wasn't? Who else would she have left with? Christmas came and gone. New Year's also came and gone. Officials had combed through the Hudson River and came up with no answers. There were reports of her disappearance in the papers, but once again, George Washington's death is dominating the front page. But on January 2nd, 1800, they finally got an answer. Just north of the boarding house was a region known as Lisbonard's Meadow. This long-forgotten wetland was situated where present-day's Tribeca and SoHo neighborhoods are. It was more or less a swamp, and the city hated it. They had long been talking about getting rid of it completely by draining it into the Hudson, and eventually did so along what we now call Canal Street. But before that could happen, they built a well right around what's now 129 Spring Street. It was about a mile away from the boarding house. On that day, January 2nd, a neighbor went to go fetch some water out of this well. He lowered a bucket down there, and when he pulled it back up, there was something in his bucket that caused him some confusion, because it looked like a dead animal. But in reality, in his bucket was a woman's fur muff. He leaned over the edge of the well to look down, and when he did, he saw the bloated corpse of Elmas Sands. An investigation was launched to determine her cause of death. Did she accidentally fall down the well, or was she thrown into the well? Her neck had bruising around it, and water was found in her lungs. The bruising implied that she had been strangled before falling down the well. She also cracked her skull and then drowned in the well. So all signs pointed to murder. And once it was revealed that Elma's intentions that night were to marry Levi Weeks, Levi was taken into custody. Levi was going to have to go to trial over this, and this became the very first murder trial in American history. I do find it hard to believe that over 15 years passed before a murder trial took place in America, but here we are. Now, I mentioned that Levi was a carpenter, but he was the less established of builders between him and his brother. His brother Ezra Weeks was far more accomplished, but did bring Levi with him on some jobs. And Ezra had done a few jobs that led to some people owing him some favors. The brothers had been working on a country home, for example, up in Harlem for a certain Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary and George Washington's former right-hand man. Ezra had also built that well where Elma was found, which definitely raises some eyebrows, but that well was built for the Manhattan Company, which was a New York bank founded by a man named, wait for it, Aaron Burr, former U.S. Senator and soon-to-be Vice President. Burr would have a personal connection to this case and would definitely want to be involved. So Ezra convinced Burr and Hamilton to work together despite their political differences. That way he could get his brother out of his trial scot-free. A third attorney also represented Levi Weeks in the trial. His name was Henry Brockholst Livingston, and he'd go on to become a Supreme Court justice. So Levi has quite the team representing him. Now, I don't know what you know about murder trials, but they can last a while. For reference, the O.J. Simpson murder trial lasted 11 months. I don't know if this being the very first murder trial to ever take place in America had something to do with it, but this trial was over within 48 hours. All of the evidence put forth by the prosecution was circumstantial. They tried to prove that Levi Weeks had motive, means, and an opportunity to kill Elma, but nothing was concrete. There was plenty of speculation, and many people remained under the impression that Levi did commit the murder, but there was no direct evidence. The defense team went as far as to make a mockery of the witnesses presented by the prosecution. They implied that they had something to gain from Levi being out of their lives, whether it was not wanting him in the boarding house anymore, a hatred for him among neighbors, but the key thing was that Levi had an alibi. He had apparently spent the majority of the evening with his brother, Ezra, and they basically couldn't account for just a few minutes of the night. It wasn't nearly enough time to get Elma, bring her to the well, kill her, and get back to their cover story. It also didn't help that the jury was made up of people closer in class to the Weeks family versus the Sands family. A key piece of evidence did suggest that Ezra owned a sleigh that was spotted nearby the well, and someone did say they saw Elma with two unidentified men near the boarding house, but once again, no direct evidence could implicate exactly what happened. This left the jury confused on how they could possibly say that Levi Weeks was guilty, so they didn't. And it took them all 5 minutes to decide. Levi Weeks was declared not guilty on April 1st, 1800, a cruel April Fool's Day declaration for the family. And to this day, we have no idea what happened to Elma. Catherine, Elma's cousin, was furious. So much so that after the ruling was announced, she publicly cast a curse to be put upon the people responsible for the lack of justice in this case. If we start with Levi, even though he was declared not guilty, he was completely ostracized by New Yorkers, and ultimately felt like he needed to leave the city, and he moved all the way down to Mississippi. Now, did he suffer once he got to Mississippi? No, far from it. He married, he had 4 kids, he was a well-respected architect, but he wasn't in New York anymore. And the believers out there will say that it's Elma who's carrying out the curse moving forward because she's not truly at rest. Did Elma get the others, though? Well, if we look at Alexander Hamilton post-trial, who lived a more cursed life than him. He was already in hot water with his family after he had an affair and it was made public, but post-1800, his oldest son, Philip, was killed in a duel by a man from whom Philip was trying to defend his father's honor. Then, after mourning the loss of his son, Alexander Hamilton tries to return to politics, only to anger Vice President Burr, who would challenge him to a duel in the same spot where his son died. And what happens next? Burr shoots and kills Hamilton. History can tell us who was at those duels, but is it possible that another person was there? A person named Elmas Sands, perhaps? What about Aaron Burr? You don't get to hear his full story in the Hamilton musical, which, by the way, references this Levi Weeks trial in the closing number of Act 1 in the song Non-Stop. Burr lived a miserable life after this trial took place. He ran for president and lost. Jefferson didn't want him as a vice president, so he changed the law. And when Burr found out, he decided he was going to run for governor of New York instead, and he lost. Badly. Like, historically bad. Burr blamed it on a smear campaign and statements made by Hamilton. That's when he challenged him to a duel, and that's where he killed him. Burr was still vice president at the time. He fled to the newly purchased Louisiana Territory and prepared for a Spanish war that never happened. He was hoping that he could claim land of his own and gain back fortunes that were lost. Instead, that led to a conspiracy trial. He was accused of treason. In 1812, Burr's only daughter, Theodosia, disappeared at sea. She just vanished. He remarried at the age of 77 to a wealthy widow named Eliza Jumel. She would divorce him a year later due to his adultery. The lawyer who represented her was just a young man by the name of Alexander Hamilton Jr., the second son of Alexander and Eliza Hamilton. Burr died shortly after that. Does it sound like a curse to you? I don't know. Maybe the strangest case of these people going through this curse, though, was Judge John Lansing. Didn't outright tell the jury what kind of verdict to come back with, but certainly leaned into the idea that a lack of evidence should probably lead to a not guilty result. Almost 30 years to the night of Elma's disappearance, Judge Lansing left his home to deliver a letter, and after he did so, John Lansing was never seen again. He just disappeared without a trace. That, too, remains an unsolved case, but many people believe that Elma had something to do with it. However, even though all of these people had their own downfalls in life, it seems that Elma's spirit is still not satisfied. It's believed that she continues to haunt the general area where she died, and that place disappeared for a number of years. With the development of the neighborhood, starting around the 1820s or so, that well went missing. Nobody had any record of it ever being dismantled or anything. And then right around the time that everybody was freaking out about Y2K, a restaurant called Manhattan Bistro had moved into 129 Spring Street. They began clearing out their basement for a wine cellar, and during that excavation project, they rediscovered that well. A busboy swore that he saw a woman in drenched 18th century clothing in the area that nobody else could verify having seen, except one other man around the block who saw a similar woman drenched head to toe near his waterbed. Now the bistro is no longer there. As of right now, there's a store called Koss, whose parent company is H&M. They occupy the space, and they sell items in their basement. And wouldn't you know it, hiding behind their mannequins, jutting out from the wall, is the well. It's become known as the Manhattan Murder Well. It does not look like it has aged in the slightest. People have reported apparitions in the area. People have said that they've heard a faint woman scream where she's pleading for her life. Merchandise has gone missing. There will be electrical shortages that can't be explained by electricians. Paranormal experts have come in and watched their equipment go haywire around the well. So obviously, believe whatever you'd like to believe. But it does kind of make you wonder, right? So that's going to do it, folks. What do we think? Is the curse real? Was that really why Hamilton and Burr lived the lives that they lived? Did Elma have something to do with it? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Remember, I'm dropping these uneasy, creepy kinds of stories all October, so if you don't want to miss out on any of these stories, you will want to make sure that you hit that notification bell. It also seems like a majority of the people who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. What are you doing? Subscribe to the channel. It would really help me out. You know what? I have a story that I've been aching to tell for a very long time, and it's coming out real soon. You will not want to miss it. So make sure that you stay tuned into the channel. Hopefully I'll catch you all on the next one. Deuces, kids.